everyone, it's Sandeep from the One Group. So I am senior consultant at the One Group, working within our Northampton office. So some of you are currently working with us and will know of us, but for those who don't, we are a specialist recruitment consultancy with offices based in Cambridge, Peterborough and Northampton. So we are delighted to be partnering with Poonam today from consultancy firm People Perform. To bring you a webinar based around resilience for people managers. So I will be popping over to her shortly. But before we do, there's a couple of bits around sort of housekeeping bits around the Q&A section. So at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A function. So currently everyone's cameras and microphones are off because we are in webinar mode. But we are keen for everyone to contribute and any questions that might come up. So if you could just pop your questions in the Q&A box, and we've also got a chat function for any interactive bits that Poonam sort of questions that she might ask, and any answers that you may have. So we will try and answer as many as possible at the end. If not, at the end, Poonam will come back to you sort of away from the webinar. We also have a poll that will be coming out shortly, which is just to give a bit more engagement as to why you've come along and what you're hoping to sort of have from this webinar. So what I will do now is I'll pop over to Poonam and she will start the webinar. So enjoy.
Thank you very much, Sandeep, and a very warm welcome to all of you. Great for turnout, as I understand, and I appreciate you joining us from wherever you are, whether it's the office or your home office, on what's a very, very topical subject for individuals, teams and organisations, especially over the last 12 months where we've seen unprecedented amounts of change and complexity, not only in the way that we live, but also the way that we work. And particularly for all of us here present, the way that we manage our people in this workplace context. You know, everyone's experiences has been incredibly unique. But the number one thing that I think we all can agree on that we've faced are monumental amounts of stress and disruption. And we've seen that take a toll on our mental health, both individually and also at work. So we've seen, you know, you've only got to look on the high street. We've seen lots of organisations struggle to withstand the effects of the pandemic, whilst a lot of other organisations have thrived. And there are many reasons why this is so. But what we're concerned about here today is the level of resilience of these organisations, which essentially is our coping tools, our mechanisms to manage any transition or upheaval. And change and adversity is a given. It's, you know, it's a part and parcel of our everyday. There's no escaping it. So as we prepare new guidelines, return to work, a new working landscape, hybrid models of working, amongst many of the changes that are due upon us, we see that the powers of resilience and the ability to cope with change can really help us to navigate the constant that we see above us. And this is where your role as people managers is really, really pivotal, because, you know, through uncertainty, whatever your starting point, you can build on your individual or collective coping mechanisms to face any uncertainties that life throw up, but also to help your teams to navigate any future changes and any changes around the corner. Now, I'm not here to teach anyone to suck eggs off. Given that poll, there's a lot of experience in this virtual room. So, you know, what I ask you to do is, whether you're new to the organisation or you're new to the term or new to the subject of resilience, I hope that this session gives you a few key takeaways to begin your collective journey of resilience. But if you do have experience in this area, please use the chat box, as Sandeep mentioned earlier on, and to share some of your functions of things that go well in your organisation. And there will be opportunities at the end to find out what actually you do well in the organisation, or even individually. It's great to learn from each other. So a very quick introduction to me, you know, and I'll keep it very, very brief. This is about you, and we've got a lot to pack into this hour. But my background's primarily in HR and coaching roles. It's over 15 years. And in that time, I've been very heavily involved in managing workplace, mental health, well-being and resilience, but working with high performing teams as well. But it's my actual passion and qualification, which is in human behaviour, and helping people to cope through adversity. And we see change and upheaval being a part and parcel of our day-to-day lives, but also in the workplace as we face different changes, different directions and new people. So I chose to focus on resilience and teams and healthy high performance, and so qualified as a positive psychology practitioner, and more recently a workplace resilience and well-being master practitioner, which enables me to go into organisations and work with individuals and teams to measure the impact of their resilience in the workplace. And we do this through workshops, we do this through one-to-one coaching, and also looking at stress and how people show up using the language of colour. So I'm also a master NLP practitioner, but ultimately, like I'm sure many of you here today, I'm a parent, and I have just about survived the last 12 months with my own children, and something that's tested my own levels of resilience. So I bring obviously a personal facet to this as well. And I'm sure you have plenty of experiences of your own, and challenges during COVID, whether it's personal or professional. We'll explore some of those later. Okay, so next slide, please. So this webinar is run in conjunction with People Perform, as Sunny mentioned earlier on. And for those of you that don't know People Perform, aren't familiar with them, we support organisations from a coaching, leadership and team development perspective, along with talent management and strategy. So whilst we're going to be talking about resilience today, I encourage you to visit the People Perform website to see other resources that are available, including the People Perform Academy, where there's a free online taster course in resilience if you want to know more after this webinar. Okay. So we're going to be talking about today's session, how the challenging times over the past 12 months have affected us as people managers, and I'll be keen to hear your experiences in the chat box at this stage. Then we'll be looking at unpacking the term resilience and what it means to each one of us. And we all have our individual spin on what this means, whether it's in our personal lives or as people managers in the organisation. And we'll be exploring the business case for investing in well-being and resilience. I'll also be looking at how we can build resilience. So this is the crux of the session here, something I'm sure you're all interested in, using the 5 pillars that I work on in my workshops or in my one-to-one coaching with individuals and teams. And I'll be leaving you with some thought-provoking questions to consider your own starting point and your potential inspiration to take things forward within your organisation. And as with any good coaching session, we'll be looking at actions, what works well, but also actions that you can take forward to implement resilience in your own workplace. Obviously, given that there's so much that we can consider and cover in 1 hour, I appreciate that there will be some infographics and slides that will be made available to you. But like Sandeep said, I'll be more than happy for you to contact me after the webinar, and we'll explore your starting point and how we can potentially help you in your journey of resilience as well. Okay. So just a quick overview before we get into the webinar itself. So as Sandeep mentioned, as a webinar, there will be mics turned off, but we do encourage you to use the chat box and the question and answer box as well to ask any questions that we can try and field at the end. That said, we're not in the same room together, and it's always difficult looking at a screen and talking to swathes of people you can't see. So it's really great to get some feedback in the chat box and to see how you are responding. But if you do wish to discuss any parts of the webinar, please do contact us afterwards. But what I do ask you for this next hour is just to turn off your texts, your phone calls, your emails, and you really savour this 1 hour that you've put aside. It's a bit of your L'Oreal moment, let's say, because you've taken the time out to find out a bit more about the topic and to take some takeaways back to your organisation. So please, please, please be actively and very physically present. This is a confidential safe space, so anything that will be discussed in the chat box will be confidential and will not be shared after the session. Okay, let's get stuck in. So obviously we can't talk about resilience, like I said earlier on, without talking about COVID. And it has been one of the biggest disruptors to our normal, with COVID giving uncertainty in terms of the numbers, the safety concerns, the effect on our businesses, even our social restrictions and our personal lives, and the impact on our mental health and our ability to cope. So much change has happened for us individually, but also as people managers, our roles have stayed the same, if not become a lot more important. Not only are you there to look after your own mental health and well-being, but you're also there to manage the workloads of your teams and your organizations, and you're role modeling as the teams look up to you of what and how they can act. So this was obviously a huge focus pre-lockdown, but the needs to equip and upskill our staff in the areas of mental health, wellbeing and resilience has just increased monumentally as we respond to more and more pressure. And what a responsibility this is for people managers. You know, one hand managing your own resilience, but also having your team look to you for answers and influenced largely by your actions as their manager. So before long, if we don't focus and pay enough attention to resilience and managing our team's resilience, then this becomes a larger collective problem, and we can only see these mental health figures spiral out of control. So it's something that we really need to focus and prioritise going forward. So with that in mind, what I'd like you to do, please go to the next slide, please. What I'd like you to do, I'd like to invite you to consider how COVID has negatively impacted your teams and organisations, and to specifically tell us about, in the chat box, any badges of honours that you have seen or you have fallen foul to yourself. Now, by this, just to give an example to start you off, one that I've come across in several organisations is the need to work 24/7 and not taking breaks. So what I'd like you to do, and maybe Sandeep, you can help field the answers and the responses, but in the chat box, I invite you to share any badges of honours that you or your organisations have experienced since COVID hit. So what's coming through, Sandeep?
So we have too many Zoom meetings.
Yes, we're all zoomed out, aren't we?
Yeah.
We're all zoomed out.
Needing to work smarter rather than harder.
Absolutely.
Lack of focus, productivity and motivation. Or a few.
Definitely seen motivation dip, haven't we, with a new landscape? Okay, any more?
Being more of a counsellor for suffering colleagues. Being stalked on Teams. Availability is always visible.
Yes, absolutely.
Department roles due to absence. Constantly having to appear on Teams. Ensuring proper diary management to allow time for breaks and also time for the team. Increased workload for those not on furlough. Refusing to take vacation days because of lack of travel possibilities. Hence,
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, goodness, what a bunch of fantastic responses there. And it just shows, doesn't it, how our landscape has incredibly changed just in the last 12 months. And as one comment that said there was, you've now starting to be a counsellor as a people manager. So not only do you have to look after your own, but you're there as a guide to help signpost your individuals in your team to the access, the support that you have. So it's a huge responsibility, and it's quite concerning when you think about it, isn't it? But a lot of what you've just covered there, and thank you for your responses, it reflects findings that we've found from several surveys and reports carried out over the last few years, including Deloitte. We've got the Stevenson Pharma review, so if you're interested in resilience, please go and check that out. But also the Mental Health Association, the HSE and Robertson Cooper, to name some of many, and our own findings when working with individuals and organisations. And I sum this up on the next slide because these are only some, and they only tell us half the story. So a very busy slide here. So to have a moment to take a look at this, but a very, very powerful one, I think, in showing us the organisational challenges that have become a lot more prevalent in the past 12 months, that have led to the outcomes that some of you have covered already, but will only continue if we allow these to carry on. So the impact of COVID has seen individuals, teams, and organisations really trying hard to cope with the impact of these new challenges. And a lot of organisations, I'm sure many of yours as well, have been forced to review your priorities, your perspectives, your landscapes, with your working from home, with furlough, and some even going through redundancies and changing goalposts. Some, as we've seen, didn't make the mark and others thrived, whereas the need for staff to step up and adjust has magnified despite the stressed and pressured environment that we're working in. So not only are you as people managers, looking to plate spin, often at the expense of your own well-being, but also being expected to look after that of your teams too. And those badges of honour that we've just gone through have set new cultural norms that we've found in an already pressured environment. And when we or our staff feel low in safety and productivity and even predictability, it's the creativity engagement that drops, as we've seen in some of your responses. And the engagement is very, very seriously impacted. And businesses have seen collapse as a result of that. So these results on the side are no small feat. These are what we're looking at. It's our reality right now, but could also exacerbate if we allow things to continue as we go forward. So everyone's resilience has been monumentally affected, and we've not even touched on the home pressures that we will bring to work. There is no such thing as work-life balance anymore. It's all very much the same thing. So you can see how things can very easily spiral out of control, and therefore our physical and emotional health and behaviours have become more of a priority the further this goes on. So the next slide, please. So what does this look like in hard and fast numbers? For those of you that like statistics and can take this away to your organisations, and this is taken from a variety of sources, including those that I've just mentioned, but also the Bupa and HSC Labour Force Survey, shows us that a whopping 32.5 million working days in the HSC survey were lost to work-related illness. And just over half, 51%, which is 17.9 million days, were taken due to work-related stress, anxiety, and depression. Now, just over half of those, 55%, have actually said they would seek a job elsewhere where well-being is not supported in their existing organisation. And one thing I've not put on this slide, but 78%, this rises to, aged 18 to 24, have had their mental health affected as a result of the last 12 months. But yet, just over half still don't see wellbeing and resilience as a necessary investment. So there's lots of good that's been done over the last 12 months, but there's a long, long way to go. And in the Fit for Work survey by Bupa in 2019 that interviewed over 5,000 employees, over 2 in 5 were working at less than 2 in 5 were working at peak performance. So that's quite concerning when you think about the impact on the bottom line and in motivation and engagement in the workplace. So poor practices and mental health is not only costing the UK economy a small fortune, but organisations are feeling the effects of this and often don't know where to start. And yet, as mental health takes the spotlight, increasingly so over the last 12 months, we need to look at retaining our nurturing, our key talent that we have and not looking to use those. So as people managers, as key deciders in an organisation, we've got to ask ourselves the question, what's the cost of doing nothing versus the benefits of doing something? So I think we'll all agree that these statistics alone are enough to convince businesses that action needs to be taken. And on the right-hand side, there's a lot of case for which supports the resilience programs or wellbeing programs that organisations have implemented already. And there's a lot of really, really good things there. I'm sure we all would like a lot of that. Okay, next slide, please. So as people managers, this issue has inevitably become yours to manage, and we've covered that already, and it's come back in your responses. So if we don't wish to fall prey to many of these issues that I've covered in the last slide, we need to focus on resilience as a priority going forward. But we talk about resilience, and this word has been bandied around quite a lot over the last 12 months. It's become quite a hot topic, one of those buzzwords, mental health and resilience and well-being. But what it means to me may be different to what it means to somebody else on the street. So what I'd like you to do, again, I'd invite you on the chat box. And again, Sandeep, if you can factor these in, please. I'd like to invite you to share what the word resilience means to you. What does the term resilience mean to you as an individual or even as an organisation? So please share those in the chat box. It'll be interesting to hear.
Bounce back ability.
That's a good one, yeah.
Adaptable to change, growth mindset. And yeah, a lot of people are saying ability to bounce back, being able to react quickly to change, being able to recover quickly from setbacks, unbreakable, and not being overwhelmed and unable to cope.
A lot of, yeah, and spot on. You know, there's a lot of fantastic definitions there and understanding, and it generally does feel the same thing. It's to do with change, and we've seen that, and the resilience that we've all required over the last 12 months has increased monumentally, whether we're aware of it or not. But no, thank you for your feedback there. And yeah, simply defined, it is the ability to overcome difficulties. And some of you mentioned the word bounce back ability. But it's also to cope with the ups and downs of the life and ride the waves of change and adversity, which is a part and parcel of our life. But it's also to recognise our own emotions, that when we are struggling, we can find a way to be vulnerable, to care and to share. But most importantly, and this is the concept of the shift from surviving to thriving, is bounce back, but also bounce forward. So it's utilising those experiences of trauma, adversity, challenge or change, but using those to create new tools that we can take forward to avoid stress and pressure or to mitigate the impact of those in the future, especially when we undergo any elements of stress. So, slide please. So this is how we interpret resilience, but on a regular basis, I often hear people or see people beat themselves up in terms of their inability to cope as they feel they should be coping. And that in itself can also be a spiral of stress, because we have a certain misconception around the term resilience and what it means for someone to be resilient. And so I'm going to cover some of those today. So the first misconception is that resilience is a personality trait. But in truth, resilience is not a thing that we just have or we just don't have. It's something that we do. And it's therefore learned behaviours from past challenges that we can build on to strengthen through practice and to face future challenges in a very, very healthy way. Another myth is that if you're resilient, you have more self-control. But again, this suggests inflexibility, as the more we try to control things, the more defensive and blinkered we become in our thinking. So resilience comes when we learn to let go of what we can't control and focus on setting healthy boundaries around the things that we can. The third myth that we find, the most popular one we find, is that, you know, if you're resilient, you just deal with it. You just get on and deal with it. But at some point in our lives, we've all felt that we should keep going at all costs, even if it breaks us. And I'm sure as people managers, we can all relate here, thinking about those impending stress and pressure deadlines. If it takes several hours a day to finish a task, then we'll do it. But resilient individuals don't just tough it out and go it alone at the risk of looking weak. They understand the value of having a support network and having healthy breaks to be in a better place, to be healthy and high performing. Another myth is that if you're resilient, you have no stress. No, but it's a resilient, individuals always experience stress. Stress is a part and parcel of life. They're not superhuman. If we're human and we have emotions, we're going to encounter stress. But it's how we respond to these that's important and that makes us resilient and helps us to thrive in our personal lives and organizations. Another one is that if you're resilient, that you are confident. Now, confidence breeds resilience. And people think that if you're confident, then you have monumental amounts of resilience and you never falter. The thing is, resilience is something that we build upon in all situations. And so by learning the right skills or equipping our teams with the skills to build their own resilience and well-being helps to increase that confidence threefold. So investment in ourselves and our team's well-being not only provides a sense of psychological safety from an organizational perspective, but also increases the resourcefulness and the capacity for us individuals and our teams to deal with further crisis or change when it arises. And then finally, and this is one I find in very lot of male-dominated environments and teams and industries, is that, and it's the one that's perhaps saddens me the most, is the one that asking for help is shameful. You know, if you're resilient, like say, you tough it out, but you don't ask for help. But the most resilient individuals demonstrate bravery and vulnerability to admit that they need the help. So it's anything but shameful. And hopefully some of these you can relate to, or you might have seen banning around in your organization. So think about some of the thoughts around resilience that you have in your organizational teams. Okay, next slide, please. So we've unpacked the term resilience, but this is the key part of the webinar here, is how can we look to build and strengthen it? And you can just have to take to Google. There are many versions or models of resilience that are available for organizations and teams, but they essentially all boil down to these 5 areas. And this is a great starting point, which underpins the work that I do with individuals, teams, and organizations to help with their resilience challenges. So I'd like to go through this, and as I do, I'd like you to consider your organizations or even your own approach as a people manager against these pillars, and note down any areas that may need strengthening or attention. I mean, these are key insights that I'll be more than happy to discuss with you following the webinar and see how we can help you in your journey of resilience. So the first one, and arguably the most fundamental of all of these areas, and the perhaps mostly neglected at times, is our energy, our physical, mental, and emotional energy. How many of you here, and I don't need a response, but how many of you here allow your phones to die or to get onto, the red battery? Very few, I imagine, very few. But looking at ourselves, is no indulgence. It's not a selfish thing to do, is to look after ourselves and invest in ourselves. So why would it be any different for our energy? So poor physical, mental, and emotional health doesn't always need a diagnosis. We all know how it feels when we feel run down or we're operating from an empty vessel. And we're run down, we have illnesses, we become irritable. We all have a certain response to challenge, to stress, and to change. So if we want to improve our own emotional regulation, as well as those in our teams, and also to improve the relationships with those around us, it's fundamental to take care of these basics first. And I'm not talking about meditation or massages in the workplace, although they have a place, don't get me wrong, but it's all about cultivating healthy habits that keep us from performing at our best. And these are sometimes the most fundamental that we overlook. So a couple of things to ask yourself in your organizations is, what are you doing as a people manager? Or what's your organization doing to drive employee energy? Do you yourself promote healthy habits during workplace? Do you take breaks? And how do you respond to those that are struggling? So something to take away. The next one is about perspective. This is about our thoughts and beliefs, as what we do stems from what we think. Perspective is about assessing our own individual and collective norms that form what is a culture in an organization, and see how they're serving you. And where necessary, learning to change those, tweak those slightly to change our experience of a situation. Now, we have a tendency to have a negativity bias as humans. We focus on what's bad, but when we think more flexibly, we learn to focus on responding to the things that we can control a lot more proactively. So think for yourselves, and things for you to consider for your teams and your organizations, but even yourself. What's your positivity and negativity ratio? How's your organization and individual perspectives helping or hindering your growth and healthy high performance in your team? And as people managers who heavily influence the behaviors of others, how are the practices that you have every day at work? How you show up? How are they influencing the team that you're managing? If this is something that you wish to explore in your own personal impact, then we do one-to-one resilience coaching and workshops to help with this. And the next one is relationships. Now, this pillar is about social connectivity. We've all experienced the lack of social connectivity and the impact it's had on us as individuals and teams. It's to do with our support network of friends, colleagues, and emotional and physical support, but also our physical and sense of belonging, which helps us to thrive. Now, I mentioned positive psychology earlier on, and we've looked at Gottman's research. If you're interested in this, then have a look at Gottman's research. He looked into positive relationships and how they are a pathway to happiness, creativity, and greater problem solving. So you can see what a pivotal role it has in the workplace if we have well-functioning teams to help our human performance. It's also about how we understand others as well. So as a people manager, do you understand when our teams are in areas of conflict? What are the quality of the relationships with your peers, with your senior, but also within your teams? So we do team dynamics as well, workshops to look at this and explore this in a bit more detail so you can have better, healthy, high-performing teams. The next one, and I think is probably one of the, again, more fundamental ones, is self-awareness. This is about emotional intelligence, and it's a critical skill for managers, and how healthy and realistic our views are of ourselves, but also how we can interpret others' behaviours in our team. And when we know how we show up and we know our own strengths and our blind spots, we can build the tools to build ourselves up and to face those challenges in healthier ways. But it also helps to improve the experience of life for us as people managers, but also for those around us. So when you look at this particular pillar, I'd like you to think about your perception. How well developed is your self-perception? And do you know your own blind spots as a manager? Have you sought feedback from your teams? Can you also adapt to difficult situations, and are you in tune with your emotions? Someone mentioned earlier on about being a counsellor. Do you know how you handle stress when your teams come to you seeking advice? So understanding ourselves is a great starting point, and to allow us to have more positive influence over others. But one of the ways that we help organisations in this area is to do personal awareness and stress workshops, but also one-to-one resilience coaching using the RAW impact questionnaire. So if it's something that you're interested in, then bear that in mind, jot that down, and we can have a discussion after the webinar. And then the final one, last but not least, is the area of purpose. And this is the ability to set goals, to motivate our teams, and to have a forward-thinking approach. And at an organisational level, this is about our vision, our direction, and our strategy. It's to do with our why, which helps every employee understand how their contribution hits the bottom line and helps the wider cause. It really enables us to focus on what's important, but also not to get distracted by things that can divert from achieving our goals. And it allows us to have a plan B when things become tough and the goals don't change. So this model is a fantastic starting point to consider your own and your organisational's resilience. And it's also a baseline to look at to see how we can look to increase it. Okay. Next slide, please. So there's a lot of information I've covered. I appreciate that. So as a bit of a moment to pause and reflect, I'd like to consider a very lovely quote that I like from Ken MacLeod. And in there, it's a very, very key message that we all have moments when things are going well and life feels perfectly balanced. But in reality, these moments just don't last very long. And so if you spend all your energy trying to perfect that balance, it'll only add to your stress. It's very natural for us to be a little bit out of kilter all times. But when we have a two-step process I like to recommend to my clients, it's to notice when you're off balance and to assess what's going on around you, and then look to correct what you need to restore some of that balance. So that involves sitting with and acknowledging things when they're feeling a little bit out of kilter, things that don't serve us in our personal and work lives, but also things that your organisation, for example, can do to bring more of a balanced state for your employees to perform at their very best. But it's also from an individual perspective, taking away the manager title for a second, if you're feeling broken or burnt out yourself, it's urging you to reach out and access those levels of support and to appreciate that it's okay to not be okay and to get the support you deserve. And this is also a role that's, I know, come along to us as people managers, as we now have to signpost individuals to wellbeing support. Okay, so given all of this, what can you take away from the webinar? If there's one slide to take away, this is it. Every manager, I think, needs a toolkit, and we could all do with some guidelines of how we can manage our own and individual and organisational resilience using strategies. But these are some of the common areas that some managers that we have worked with have benefited from as they've looked to build their own resilience. And this is just a small snapshot. So the first one, I think, is more about sort of just knowing yourself and your teams. It's communicating more than you think you need to. It's investing in your self-awareness, understanding what makes you and your people tick, but also to understand the triggers and how we all show up under pressure so that we can look to prevent that impact. It's having one-to-ones regularly, not just odd drop-ins, especially with the working from home situation. We don't have that face-to-face interaction that we used to. So it's an extra exerted effort to practice active listening and to look out for variations in your team behaviours. Now, it's not your job to fix individuals or to assume that they're okay, but to create an environment or a culture of trust and openness so that one-to-ones are a great non-invasive tool to help better support your team when they need you. Then we're looking at relationships, and this is about assessing the strength of the relationships and supporting the team dynamics. So it's knowing everyone's response to triggers, knowing how individual styles are affecting each other, because only once you can do that, you can stop and mindfully make the changes to understand yourself and others around you a lot better. Then it's looking at resources. So prevention is better than cure, when it comes to mental health resilience. So taking a proactive approach to train and upskill yourselves as managers, but also your teams is critical, but also the leaders, because they role model behaviours. So consider looking at soft skills training, looking at having an internal mental health practitioner or first aider, or even buddies or a coach, because this can help incorporate healthy, high performance and practices into the workplace and creates a very encouraging environment that enables people to access this support. Now, we can embed healthy, high practices into the workplace, such as dental and gym membership. And they have a place, don't get me wrong, but to build resilience starts with the individual. So it's looking at ourselves and measuring the impact of our own resilience to then know where we can take this forward. But as HR individuals in this webinar, for those of you that are here, it's looking at how to modify those practices and policies so they can mitigate the stress in an environment of uncertainty. Then there's the area of culture. Do you just say it, or do you support mental health? You have to show it and model it through your actions, not only as individuals, but as managers and organisations. So this is about looking at the language you use around your teams, the language you use around mental health and well-being, but also your own perspective and how that's influencing your behaviours, but those around you. And are they helping or hindering the progress of you, and are they limiting the diversity and creativity in your teams? We've all heard the words agile and flexibility. Are you agile in your thinking, or are you fairly fixed, and how does that impact those around you? So it's looking at common goals. What's got us here won't necessarily get us to the next stage. So it's reviewing that direction. It's looking at the core of what we all do and assessing and changing those goals to adapt. But it's also, and I mentioned this before, role modeling behaviours. And this starts from the top down. It's actions, not just words. And it's the ability to be vulnerable, authentic, and share some of your own struggles and what works for you. Because doing this not only helps improve that psychological safety for your people to open up and do the same, but it removes the stigma of mental health and absenteeism, because you're walking the walk and you can break down some of those badges of honour that we considered earlier on. And you can have a real influence as a people manager and create a very mentally healthy culture. And then finally, it's knowledge. This essentially is investing in training and prioritising preventative action, so it doesn't become an issue once the horse is bolted. It's embedding that continuous learning approach in your organisation and creating a learning culture where learning about ourselves and to build our own skills becomes an ongoing journey. And self-reflection becomes part and parcel of these one-to-one meetings that you have. And with resilience being a combination of learned skills and personal characteristics, learning this and giving individuals the platform to be self-aware can help springboard their own confidence and boost their own levels of energy in the workplace. So looking at resilience workshops, looking at team dynamics, but also how individuals show up in stress can be a really great starting point for you. So hopefully this slide helps and gives you some thoughts and pointers to take away and how to focus your own journey towards resilience. But on the next slide, what I'd like you to do, and again, use the chat box. We've talked a lot about what potentially could go wrong if we're not proactive. But again, like I said, there's over half the organisations that have already started or have been practicing healthy high behaviours and have a wellbeing programme in place. So I'd love to hear what's going well for you as you build your own wellbeing and resilience. And it's a great opportunity for us to learn from each other. So I invite you to, in the chat box, share what's worked for you and how you've potentially powered your own batteries as an individual or even in your organisation. So again, Sandeep, if you can let us know what's coming through.
Absolutely. Employee assistance service, regular one-to-ones, wellbeing champions trained in mental health, time to talk, mornings each. Right. Humour in meetings.
Yes, so yeah, absolutely. I think humour is very needed, isn't it? Helps break down those barriers.
Mental health first aiders have introduced a EAP, have a mental health first aider, wellbeing assessments for everyone, staff surveys, video call blackout afternoons. That's a good one.
That's a good one.
Regular check-ins around the team, not just employee to manager. Social calls.
And that's really important, isn't it? As we say, with the work-life balance, again, there's no the blur between work and life. Having those one-to-ones that are dedicated just to social chat are just as important as those one-to-ones relating to our work goals. So that's really important.
We've got no Zoom meetings every Friday.
That's a good one.
Calling all co-workers since the start of the pandemic on a 10-week rota just to check in and walk and talk initiatives.
It's great. We have seen a lot of people do walk and talks and take away from Zoom meetings, getting away from the screen. So they're incredibly important.
Offering to pay for additional support, therapists, etc.
That's really encouraging. There's some fantastic ideas there, and actually some that even I've perhaps not have come across. So then hopefully we've all got to take a couple of ideas from there and things that we can look at in our own organisations. One that I've seen is a bit of a footer on an email, where if individuals work flexibly, they're sending out a footer that says, I'm sending this out because I work flexibly at an unsociable hour. However, I don't expect you to respond at this time. So it's having those boundaries in place and having some really positive interventions that are helping to be more proactive when it comes to our mental health and wellbeing and resilience. So thank you for sharing those. So it's on the next slide. And again, this is another chat box, please. Given the information that we've covered in today's webinar, as we look to wrap up the session, hopefully some of the slides have given you some thoughts and light bulb moments to take away to focus on either as individuals, team leaders, or as organisations, but also to increase your own individual collective resilience. So as a call to action, as with any great session, I'd like to invite you to share just one thing that you're going to take forward, or something that you've taken away from the webinar that can inspire your next steps on your journey of resilience. So pop those in the chat box and see if we can inspire others too. What's coming through, Sandeep?
Yeah, so we've got consult further HR for good practice reviews, fortnightly team quiz at the end of the working week, More coming through. Calling all co-workers since the start of the pandemic. Invest time and energy.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the fundamentals that we very easily oversee. And sometimes it can be as basic as just getting up from the desk and having a stretch or a move, and that can help increase our energy. Any more?
So we've got research link between well-being and productivity and see what would work for our organisation. We have trained 40 plus mental health first aiders, but don't promote widely. Plan one sessions, social focused, no work, just talking.
Lovely ideas to take away. And like I say, you'll get a copy of the slides. If there's something that you want to go revisit, then you can have a look at the slides and start planning from there on. Great, thank you, Sandeep, and thank you everybody for your feedback on that. So let's go to the next slide. So we come to the sort of end of the session, and as a bit of a summary, we reflect on our learnings through the lens of people managers or decision makers in the organisation. This is just a reminder that resilience, and any change begins with you first and foremost. And you need to put your own safety mask on before you can help be a beacon for other people. So consider your own starting point as individuals, but also look at what your team's gaps are and where you can look to fill those with some of the resilience training or the impact or the workshops that we can offer. Now, the other thing is that resilience can be developed. And so with the right investment, you can equip your teams with the emotional and physical strength to succeed and to handle any further change or adversity that that could be upon us at any time, so that we can better manage change and be healthy, sort of high performing teams together. And some of you will, immediately have ideas to take away an action. And if so, that's fantastic. I hope this is really the catalyst to enable you to do so. But others may sort of need to grasp the concept and have the understandable challenge of knowing how to implement those changes. But ultimately, just know that in either instance, if your organisations or teams do need a helping hand, you don't have to go it alone. We've got the team at People Perform who'd be more than delighted to help plug those gaps and help support you towards greater resilience and happier workforce in your organisations. Okay. So just the next slide. If you do wish to recap, and again, I mentioned this at the beginning of the webinar, we have created a free resilience course on the People Perform Academy, Digital Learning Academy, and there's a QR code there. If you can scan that, that will take you straight there. But to understand how we can help you, please feel free to reach out after the webinar, and we'll be more than happy to have a further discussion if we don't manage to answer all of the questions, if there's any questions that have come through in the session. So don't be shy. Thank you very much for your time and patience. And I wondered if there's any questions to field.
Yes, we do. So we have, how can we support an individual to build their personal resilience?
Great question. Thank you, Marie. And I think I mentioned the RAW Master Practitioner. So that RAW tool is a tool that we can use to measure an individual's personal resilience using those 5 pillars that we've covered already. So what we can do is get a measure of where they are right now, where their gaps are, and how we can look to help them as an individual, personally or in the workplace, through different behaviours and activities, to improve those areas of resilience to help them to better cope with change. So if that's something you're interested in, then do definitely reach out to me. We have a tool that we can use to measure that impact.
Another question. So how can you balance empathy with resilience, so not to absorb your team's issues, but still be able to help them effectively and with genuine intent?
Great question again. And this one comes down to boundaries, healthy boundaries. So it's, you've got to remember, as I said before, you put your own safety mask on before you can help others. So if your own resilience levels are quite low, and some of those areas in empathy, or your own boundaries are low, then you're going to absorb a lot more of those team issues, then affect your well-being as a result. So again, just like the last answer, we can look at measuring your own impact of resilience to see where your blind spots are, where some of those areas are that can penetrate some of other people's energy that can affect you, and look to strengthen those together through one-to-one coaching. So I think that's something that we can explore, but it is to do with boundaries. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, brilliant. We've got one more question. So how would you approach senior managers who are reluctant to lead by example or invest in resilience?
Great question. And it's something that I think a lot of organizations and HR and people managers struggle with. But you've only got to look at measuring the cost of absenteeism in your workplace and the impact on productivity. Now, the slides we're happy to share, but there's some of those resources like the Deloitte, the Stevenson and Farmer report. There's so much information out there and statistics that can show the very impact on an organization's productivity and bottom line, so figures, of not investing in this. So we can try and ignore it, but they've also got to take the consequences that come as a result of not investing in that. So there's business cases, and I can, that's something that I'd be more than happy to help you with, but there are business cases that are available that, you can approach senior managers. There's really no argument with that. There's a clear case for investing in our people and our people's training. But those figures do really speak for themselves.
Brilliant. Fabulous. So any further questions? I think Poonam's sort of happy to answer after, sort of away from the webinar. But really appreciate everyone to sort of who's logged on. I hope you've taken something away from today. We will be sending out slides and a recording after, so you can sort of take that back to your teams or sort of other managers within the business. And any further questions, feel free to come back to us. We have got more webinars coming up, so we'll of course keep you posted. And yeah, I hope everyone has a great day.